my fellow comic book collectors. It's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and this is the Wednesday video where I answer your questions. This week we got some pretty good questions, and let's get right into them. First question comes from Epoch, who asked, speaking of variant covers, when a comic has several variants and is also a key, such as a first appearance, would you consider the book with the main cover the first true appearance? Well, yes and no. So generally when a book comes out, it'll have like multiple variants. And like you'll have like A cover, B cover, C cover. Now, if those all contain the first appearance and they're all printed at the same time, I consider those the first appearance. Now, sometimes you'll have a situation where the A cover doesn't have the first cover appearance and maybe the B or C cover has those first appearances. So sometimes I prefer those over the A cover, but if the A cover has the first appearance on it, then that's also good. But here's where the variant thing comes in a little strange. Sometimes what you'll have is a Comic-Con exclusive variant, or like some kind of shop exclusive variant or something like that, where the variants happen actually after that first appearance books were published. And those I don't consider first appearances because they were published later. In my mind, they're kind of like second prints at that point. Even though they're technically first prints, I don't really value them that way. They're later on printings. And sometimes you'll have Comic-Con exclusive variants that come out years after. So in my mind, those are definitely second printings. When they're within a few weeks, maybe I'll, be a little bit more tolerant towards them in terms of whether or not they should be considered first prints or not. But generally, I'll gravitate to the book that came out first. So hope that makes sense. Because I want to get that first appearance, first time that we see them ever, historically speaking. Next question comes from K. Munin. Thanks for answering my question. I've been wanting to read some of those Golden Age stories. When you first started collecting comics, what series or character did you gravitate towards? If you could go back in time, is there anything that you would change about how you approached comic collecting? As always, your knowledge is very much appreciated. Okay, so when I first started collecting comics, I kind of gravitated towards Howard the Duck because that's the book that kind of got me started into collecting comics, but also Spider-Man. And I gravitated towards characters like Plastic Man. So I thought Plastic Man was cool. I wanted to get his first appearance. I wanted to like learn more about those characters. And also, I grew up watching Spider-Man, the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and Justice League. And so those characters really appealed to me. And my parents, they really indoctrinated me with Uncle Scrooge, Richie Rich, Donald Duck, Goofy, all those kind of character comics, those books. So those ones I also really wanted to get into and collect their first appearances as well. So that's kind of where I went with my collecting at when I was starting. And I kind of gravitated more to the quirkier characters. Now, if I could go back in time and collect differently, I would use the knowledge that I have now and pick up more of the Golden Age stuff, because that's really where my interests lie now. And back then, they were probably a lot more affordable. Did I have the money even back then to buy them? Probably not, but I would have liked to have been a better collector. I would have bagged and boarded my comics as well. That's another thing that I didn't do when I was first starting collecting comics, and that is something I wish I had done a bit better job of. And especially with my Disney comics, the books that my parents gave me, a lot of those were very mangled when I got them, and they were really in rough shape. Also, I kind of wish I could go back into when the comic bust happened of the 90s again. because there was a lot of comics where the shops were just going out of business, and it was a really great time to pick up books for very, very, very cheap prices. Um, I had a tendency of buying a lot of books for cover price. I mean, when they first got like released, I'd have like my pull list back in the '90s, and I think in a way I kind of regret doing that because I put a lot of money into those comics that later on became worth less than cover. So I kind of wish I had not spent so much money on those books, or maybe waited a little bit to buy them and gotten them below cover price, because a lot of the books, they went from being like $2 or $3 to 50 cent kind of level books. They just really didn't go anywhere in terms of value. A good example of that was I was really into collecting Malibu comics and Ultraverse, and it didn't go anywhere. You can pick those books up dirt cheap nowadays. So I wish I had kind of used less money on those and more money, use that same money on other things like Golden Age or something cooler. And actually at the time, Golden Age really wasn't valued. I think I did collect well in a way though, because I did gravitate towards the Warren magazines, which were really undervalued and now are actually more valued by collectors. So there's always the wins and the losses. You never know. We don't have a time machine, so yeah, it's one of those things. Actually, the funny thing is, a bunch of people ask me time machine questions on this list, so we'll get into more time machine questions later on. Next question comes from Stepify, and he asked, "Hey, hi Alan. We recently spoke about the Comic Code Authority. For such an important entity as the comic book history, have you discovered any more information about it? Thank you, Stephen." Okay, so one of the things that he asked me about the Comic Code Authority before, and I was really kind of stuck when I was searching about the Comics Code Authority. So what happened was he asked me about who ran it, how was it, where was it even located, and he asked me a bunch of things. How did the approval process go, and all this kind of stuff. So what I found out was there was a idea that he came up with. Actually, he said maybe they're incorporated, and so that gave me the hint that I actually knew what the name of the Comic Code Authority company was, and it is the Comic Magazine Association of America, Inc. And once you start searching for that, you start finding more threads to pull. And one of the threads that I found to pull was I found out who was actually in charge of that company, and that was Judge Charles F. Murphy. Now, the funny thing is, when you search for stuff about Charles Murphy or Judge Charles Murphy or Charles F. Murphy, you search all those things, you find out certain things that are related to him, and then there's other people with the same name that aren't him. The Charles Murphy that you want is the one that was born in 1910. And actually, there's no Wikipedia entry about him. It's actually really hard to find any information about Charles F. Murphy, except for some news clips that I was able to manage to find. And what I learned about Judge Charles Murphy is that he was a former New York magistrate. He was also a specialist in juvenile delinquency. He would handle a lot of cases involving youth. And what happened was he was actually seeing a lot of these young kids come in, like about the early 50s, 1951 era. He was seeing a lot of these kids come to the court, and he was kind of disturbed by that. And he felt like there was something happening in society that was causing this problem. And he didn't actually blame comics as much as Wortham did, but he saw that it's like if you have a child that is in a poor home relationship, or a situation where it's not a good structure, then comics only put seeds into that kid's mind that can lead to further decay. so that's kind of the way he was thinking. He was actually involved with a bunch of different organizations to help kids. The Teen Plan Inc., which was actually to help kids find jobs and help them with kind of adjusting to society. He was also involved with the Child Service League in Queens, New York, and that was involved with helping youth with delinquency. So a couple of things that he was involved with. And he basically was the one who was called the czar of the comic society or industry, comic industry. Basically, he was the one that called the shots at the Comic Code Authority. And there's actually some pretty funny stories about that. So he would hire artists, and he would give them guidance on following the code. And the code was a pretty strict set of rules governing comics. And if you follow those rules, you got the Comic Code Authority stamp on your comic. And if you didn't follow those rules, you didn't get it on, and you would have to go back through the approval process. Now, the Comic Code Authority didn't actually control the industry in the general sense, but it would the distributors would not distribute your books if you didn't have that Comic Code stamp on you. so basically, you could publish your books all you want, but you would never be able to distribute them. So that, in a way, was kind of a control over the comic book companies. The interesting thing was that there was actually a story about Harry Lucy, and Harry Lucy, I guess he's a bit of a a bit of a funny guy. He would send in his pencils into the Comic Code Authority to get approved. And when he sent it in, he would do the very first page, and that would be fully drawn with the girls wearing proper clothing. But then all the other pages, the girls wouldn't have any clothing on them. So they actually had a artist on staff, Terry Senzix, who would actually draw all the dresses on the rest of the pages to kind of make it Comic Code approved. So it's kind of funny. So there's some stories like that where there's some shenanigans that they would play on the Comic Code Authority. But the Comic Code Authority was very strict in terms of the rules. There are some really weird things, though, where romance books, for some reason, got away with a lot of things that wouldn't or shouldn't pass through the code. For example, in the Comic Code, marriage is very important. Like you have to just show that marriage is the ideal situation, and that you don't want to show relationships outside of marriage. So that if you look at most romance books, they would fail on that. There's a bunch of things like that. You're not allowed to show anything that's sexual or promiscuous, and those, again, romance books would totally fail on. So there was some interesting things like that. And when they actually came out with the code, and this is more that I learned about Charles Murphy, was they really saw it as a means to crack down not on comics in general. It wasn't like they were going against all comics. They were really specifically targeting horror comics. They really thought those were the ones that really needed to be cracked down on the most. So the Comic Code Authority came into play on September 18th or 16th, I can't read my own handwriting, 1954, with the mandate that by January 1st of 55, all comics would be going through this code authority, and there wouldn't be this issue with overly horrific covers or stuff that wasn't code approved, where it would be detrimental to kids. Now, the interesting thing about the code was there was about 2,000 companies that produced comics before the code, and about 200 after that. And this, in a way, kind of created some real winners within the comic book industry. DC and Marvel being the two biggest winners of it. Because what happened is it basically created monopolies. Before the Comic Code Authority, you had much more broad base of companies that were able to compete and produce cool comics. But afterwards, you really kind of limited the market to just a handful of companies. And those companies actually, a lot of them failed soon after the code even. So the numbers just kept on dwindling pretty quick after the Comic Code Authority was put into play. And you get basically Marvel and DC dominating the market by the mid part of the Silver Age. So just very interesting how that works. So those are some of the more things that I found out. I also found out one last tidbit about the Comic Code Authority and its address. So it was located on number 41 East 42nd Street, New York, New York. So, you can go visit them and say, hey, what's going on? But they're no longer in business, but that's what you could have done with a time machine. So that's what they would do. They would submit their books there, and usually things would be turned around fairly quickly because usually from what I noticed within the time frames is usually it was about a 2 to 3 month process from when the comic companies created the content and from getting the approval to getting to the newsstand. So there's a pretty quick process. But that's basically all I've discovered. I hope that's interesting. Yeah, a little bit more information about the Comics Code Authority. Mass Peanut wrote, do you have any books that have double covers, marked rulers, inserts, or any other specialty that you can show? Okay, so I don't have any marked rulers, and I don't have any double covers in my collection. But I do have one book, kind of interesting, and I can't really show what makes it interesting, which kind of defeats the purpose, but I'll show it anyways, and I hope you understand. So this is Elektra, and this is Volume 2, Number 3 from 2001. It's a Greg Horn cover as well. And this book, when it first came out, and basically it got recalled, Elektra inside of it is nude. There's like a panel where she's nude. So they actually recalled it, and they darkened it up so that she wouldn't be in nude. But yeah, I'll show you the back as well. So that's kind of something cool. I do gravitate to recalled comics, and I have a few in my collection, but not a massive collection of those. Other things that I do have would be price variants. I do have a few price variants in my collection, but they're not super interesting. I don't know. I wish I had a few double covers or marked rulers inserts, but I don't have any of those. So sorry. Yeah, I failed on that one. Next question comes from William Barrett. Alan, do you sell or trade comics to upgrade what you have? Yes, I do. So I'm always willing to trade to upgrade, or like even do the situation where I trade a comic for another comic and even give cash to do the upgrade if that's a possibility. So I actually want to upgrade my comics. I mean, I have a lot of low grade comics, but I love to have high grade comics actually. But I also trade my duplicates. So I'm actually doing a big trade with Big Beam and Fly, the comic guy, where I have like 2 full banker boxes filled with comics that are all duplicates for me. And I'm using those to trade with him for books that he has that he's not interested in, but that I like. So we're kind of doing a big trade. It's going to be a pretty big trade that will be airing once it's complete. It's probably going to be a few weeks. We're kind of doing it in pieces. I think there's over 50 books that we've kind of identified that we each want from each other. So it's going to be a pretty massive trade. So far, it's so far we've taken 3 days, 3 separate days where we've been kind of negotiating this big trade, and he's been pretty good with me about trading. So I've been beating him up on it a little bit, but I do that. I beat my own books up too, so it kind of balances out. But I do like to trade with people. Comic Mag Musings asked, here's a related question, Alan. What are your top 10 favorite comic magazines from any era in your collection? Okay, so I picked out a bunch that are kind of my favorites. There were some that I probably could have switched out, but for the most part, these are my favorites. Like, actually, they are. And the first one, I like it because it's just a cool book. I actually enjoyed the movie that's related to this book. This is the first appearance of the New Mutants, and it's a comic magazine. It's the Marvel graphic novel, The New Mutants. It's a black cover, so it's hard to get in high grade. So mine's like only a 7.5. But you got Chris Claremont's story, Bob McLeod cover and art. And it's the origin first appearance of the New Mutants, Cannonball, Psychic, Sunspot, and Wolfsbane. So they got them all on the cover too, which is cool. And it's a nice, this hard to get a high grade just because of all the black. But very cool book. That's actually the very first slab that I ever got in my collection for magazines. That was my first magazine slab. I was like, oh wow, it's like really cool. So I was quite happy to get that one. The next one is another really cool book. And this is Pussycat, The Adventures of Pussycat. Now this had a lot of really great artists involved with it. It had Bill Everett doing the cover, and you got Bill Ward inside, and Wally Wood. It's just got some really great artists. It was actually created by Marvel magazines, Marvel comics, but in this case magazines. And it's a bit more risque. There's no nudity or anything, but it's just a bit more sexy than typical Marvel stuff. And it's just a really cool book. So yeah, it says Bill Everett cover and pinup, 1968. Pussycat #1, and it has this on the back. So this is actually interesting. Back to the comics code, just for 1 second here. This is alcohol, and alcohol was not allowed to be advertised on comics after the comic code, but magazines didn't have to follow those rules. So very cool. A little extra there for people interested in the comic code. So that's that one. Another magazine, and this is kind of one that is a big one for me. I really love this magazine, and it's not a comic like comic book in the general sense kind of magazine. It is a magazine that talks about comics, and I'll show you what I mean by that. This is Wizard #1. Nice Todd McFarlane cover. This book, for me, really it captures my whole comic book collecting experience when I was a kid. I loved Wizard magazine. I really did. Like it was one of the books that I would get every time it came out. I would get it. I didn't get this issue. I didn't have. I had sort of later issues, but I would get it, and religiously, first thing I do is like pick it up and open it up and go through it just to see what's hot, what's not, how the price is going. Oh, did my book go up in value? And what's the hot list of the week, of the month? And I just really enjoyed Wizard magazine. I thought it was the greatest thing. It's kind of like the Comic Tom of its time, and the Speculator's book. And I was a big speculator when I was a kid. I had dreams of finding comic gold, and this was a great magazine to help you find that comic gold. So this is the first Wizard price guide. Spider-Man poster by Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane cover, 1991. We've got X-Men back as well. So just a really cool magazine. I really, really like that book. So those are the first first three. And we'll get into some raw books that I have. I'm going to show a few here. Raw magazines, I should say. One is the Savage Tales. And this is the first thing, first appearance of Man-Thing. Just a really cool book. And it's a great decapitation cover. You got the guy, just a really great, cover for this one. And this is like M for mature reader. So you got to be a mature reader to read this. I'm not sure if I can read it because I'm not necessarily that mature. But definitely a cool book. I love this one. I love these first appearance books. A lot of magazines had first appearances before the comics did. And this is a good example of that. The first appearance of Man-Thing. And then we have one that's one that I like this for weird reasons. It's probably the least valuable of the ones I'm about to show, but I like it just because of the cover. I kept on seeing this magazine, and the comic shop that I kept on seeing it at wanted a crazy price for it, and I was like, oh, always annoyed by that. And it was one of those things where I didn't want to order it on eBay because then I have to pay crazy shipping for it. It was like in one of those weird situations. But then I ended up finding it for a reasonable price. And this is Elvira magazine, #1. I just thought this is such a great cover. You got, this weird demon dog poodle, and you got Elvira, and it's like a witch burning thing going on. And you got the nice photo cover on the back. I was a big Elvira fan. I really like those midnight theater kind of elements, and she was fairly funny. So this is Elvira #1. And Elvira for me is kind of like Vampirella. And, I kind of like both characters. So she's very Vampirella-like. And speaking of which, the next magazine that I really like is Vampirella. Vampirella #1. First appearance of Vampirella. And this is a Frank Frazetta cover. And it's a great cover. Just awesome. Like a really awesome cover. And it actually has her origin story inside, which is very, very basic. Basically, she goes to, she's on a planet where the rivers are filled with blood. And the blood rivers dry up. But fortunately for her, some astronauts end up landing on her planet, and she drinks their blood because she's like, oh wow, these guys have water for blood in their blood. So she fortunately survives by drinking their blood and then using their rocket to come to Earth. So the very first appearance, slight origin story for Vampirella. She was a bit campy. She was more of a narrator in this series. Up till about the 7th issue, and then she starts getting her own stories. But this one definitely is a big one for me. I was a big Vampirella fan, and she's my favorite character actually of all. Then we got Eerie #1, and I was a big Warren collector, so I'm gonna have to show a couple Warrens. I actually decided not to show more Warrens. I actually could have just filled this top 10 with just Warren magazines, but I was like, I'll just show a couple. Creepy #1 would have been another one that should have been on this top 10 list. And there's a few anniversary issues that I really like as well. So this is Eerie #1, and this is really rare. This is an ash can. There was only a couple hundred of these made, and they're just incredibly rare. I got this almost directly from Forrest J. Ackerman, sort of like through a friend who got it from from Forrest J. Ackerman. And it's so Eerie #1. And this was basically an ash can they used to basically get the rights so that they could get the trademark to the Eerie name. So just a cool book. Yeah. So that's probably the smallest of the magazines actually I'm going to show. and in terms of size. And the next one is actually 3 books, so I'm sort of cheating. This is top 10, but it's top actually 12, because I'm going to show 3 books. They're all connected though, and I'll show you what I mean by that. We got Spiro, and Spiro, this is 1071, and this book is the very first appearance of the Smurfs in comics. So very cool book. If you're a Smurfs fan, which I am, I really like the Smurfs. I would record them every Saturday morning on my VHS tapes, and I had like a couple tapes, I think 2 or 3 tapes devoted to the Smurfs, where I just record them all. And I'd rewatch the Smurfs all the time. I think as a kid, you don't mind rewatching the same thing like 20, 30 times. So I really enjoyed the Smurfs. So this is their first appearance. And the next book is Spiro, what number is it? Well, it says on the back. Oh, the next issue, 1072. And this is the first cover appearance of the Smurfs. So you got all the little Smurfs up there, and you got Papa Smurf right there, and all the other Smurfs. Actually, Brainy Smurf's not on the cover, though, sadly enough. That was a character I really liked as well. Brainy Smurf and Hefty Smurf and all the Smurfs. So yeah, so Spiro 172. And then much, much later, they had, this is Spiro 1268, which is the time where, it's not the first appearance of Smurfette, but is the time where Smurfette becomes a real Smurf. So the way we know Smurfette is with the blonde hair. Well, this is where she gets the blonde hair and she becomes a real Smurf. So yeah, so this is that story. I actually have her first appearance as well, but this is my slabbed copy of the first appearance of Smurfette as a real Smurf. So that's those ones. So that counts as 1, even though it's 3 books. And next, sort of an obvious one. So this is kind of a bit bigger book on the list, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1. It's magazine size, and it's a really cool book. A book that I never thought I would actually have in my collection, tell you the truth, because I didn't think I would ever be able to afford a copy. I was pretty excited to be able to get this book. I never thought I would be able to ever own a copy because it was always expensive. It's the first appearance of the Ninja Turtles. It's Kevin Eastman and layered cover, comic, Pierre Layer story, cover, and art, and Kevin Eastman cover. Sorry, story I should say. Its origin, first appearance of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Splinter and Shredder wraparound cover. So I'll show you the wraparound, which is really cool. It's not a super high grade, but it's it's a reasonable grade. White pages too. So yeah, that was a major book for me, and I really love this book just for that reason. Because I liked the Ninja Turtles as a kid, but didn't really think I'd ever own their first appearance. It was a hard book to find. Even if you asked around, do you have the first appearance of the Ninja Turtles? Nobody had it. You can maybe get like 4th printings or 5th printings, like later printings, but not first printing. The next one, and this is probably my #1 magazine, maybe the Vampirella. That's questionable because I really like Vampirella too. But another thing that I really enjoyed and really got into as a kid was Mad Magazine. And this one is not actually a magazine. So, I'm showing all these magazines, yet this is actually a comic. But it becomes a magazine. So that's kind of the interesting thing about it. So this is Mad #1 from EC Comics 1952, and it is the first satire comic. And it was originally a comic, and it was only later on when the Comic Code Authority came into play that they switched it over to the magazine format so that it wouldn't get censored. And this one is got a Harvey Kurtzman story and cover. And it has like a whole bunch of really great artists involved with it. It has Wally Wood, Bill Elder, Jack Davis, and John Severin art inside. It's just a really good, like EC had some phenomenal artists working for them. And this is like, a classic book. I mean, this is probably, this is a pretty major grail for me, actually. So yeah, I always liked Mad Magazine. So those are my top 10. I hope you enjoyed them. I tried to have a bit of variety there. Some golden age to modern. So yeah, hope you enjoyed those. Next question comes from William Barrett again. Now, this question I wasn't quite sure about, and I'm going to try to answer it based on what I'm guessing the question means, but I'll get into it. What are the pertinent details of the newsstand and the direct edition apply? Of when the newsstand and direct edition apply? I don't know what that means. Do you mean like how you can tell the difference between a newsstand and direct? I'm not sure. Well, it's simply whether or not it has the barcode. And sometimes if it has a barcode, it'll say newsstand, or sometimes it'll say direct on it. Like it'll do that. Also, sometimes it'll have like something else within the barcode. Instead of having the barcode, it'll have this like the Spider-Man or some kind of thing within the barcode. The other thing is newsstands generally are books that were sold in the newsstands, whereas direct is to comic shops or direct from the publisher. So if you had a subscription from like some comic company, you would get direct editions. So generally, that's all there is that I can think of. Maybe that relates to that question. Hopefully it helps. And then Kurmas asked, if you had a time machine, again, see the time machine, second time machine question, and had one trip for you to go back in time and one copy of any comic right off the rack, the day it came out, which would it be? Common Sense, you get Action Comics #1, but if it's another book, let us know. Well, it's Action Comics #1. It's just like, if I'm going to get a comic book and I'm going to get it like minty fresh, of course I'm going to get Action Comics #1 because it's super valuable. And I'd probably sell it and buy a whole bunch of books with it. That's the kind of thing you would do. What I would do actually is I'd get the really minty copy of Action Comics #1, so it's like a 9/8, and then bring it to the future, and then say, hey, look, there was this weird warehouse find. I found Action Comics in a 9/8, and get it slabbed and graded and all that kind of stuff. Sell it for $20 million because it would be worth that much, and then get a lower grade Action Comics #1 because I'd still want to have that in my collection, and then get a whole bunch of other books, have a nice house, do a whole bunch of things because that's a lot of money. So that's probably the way it goes. I mean, probably any collector would probably give you the same kind of lame answer, but it just makes sense, because you can buy the other book with that kind of money because Action Comics is the most expensive comic of all. So I hope that answers your questions. If you have a question you would like to ask me, put it in the comments below and I will do my best to answer it. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.